Today we're actually talking about, we're taking a little break. If you've been with us, we're in the book of James, but I'm taking a slight break today in the book of James because this past week I was at a local high school called Success Unlimited, and I got invited to go speak there. And so I spoke to the student body, and there are probably 130, 150 students in there. And I spoke a message this past week that I actually, in the middle of the night, had this idea like, hey, I should give that message to these students. And I woke up and I wrote it right before I went on the topic of Zacchaeus, right? So this is a big story about a little man. And I spoke at that school, and it was just a really great I would say connection with these students. And we got to see like 30 or so that asked Christ to come into their life. And it was amazing to see, this past week. And so Elva and so Sophia's the one that got me in the doors over there through Elva, her mom. And but it was amazing. So I thought, you know what? Why don't let's just talk about Zacchaeus this morning. And so if you have your Bible, we're going to be in Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. And the title of the message is this: What's your excuse? What's your excuse? The basic summary of my message is simple. What excuses are you hiding behind that keep you from a relationship with Jesus or a deeper relationship with Jesus? I've noticed that a lot of people it's either they're not interested or they're only interested in a little bit of Jesus. Have you noticed that? Especially in the South, I don't understand it in its totality that some people are so content with so little of Jesus. He makes himself available to you. Matter of fact, he's done everything. He's broken down every wall to be in your life, every single one of them. But we are so often content with very little of him, where we'll just maybe want to look at him or maybe just hear from others about him. But to taste of him, yes, that was my son. He said Jesus, that's right. To really encounter him, to know Jesus, not to just see him from a distance, but to know him up close. What's your excuse? Like, what's holding you back, really, from having a deeper relationship with him? Zacchaeus was a man that did not let anything hold him back from seeing Jesus. And what he got is actually more than he was even wanting. Jesus will always do that in your life, by the way. He will always give you more than you ask for. And it's a blessing that he does that. Luke chapter 19, are you there? Luke chapter 19, we'll read it to get an idea about it. Luke 19, this is what it says, starting in verse 1. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but he could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. He's a little guy, little fella. So he ran ahead and he climbed into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Yo, Zacchaeus, why don't you make haste and come down? For today I'm going to your house. And so he made haste and he came down and he received him joyfully. But when they saw it, the crowd, they all complained, saying, He has gone to be the guest with a man who's a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Lord, look, if I have wronged anybody, he says, I'll give half my goods to the poor, and if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I will restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. Pausing there. A big story about a little guy. A story that I think really will impact our hearts to the degree as much as you want of Jesus. Now, sadly, a lot of people do make excuses about their relationship with God or church or even just in life. I was even just reflecting back on the years of being a boss and when I had employees that worked for me and some of the excuses that people would give me about not coming to work. That it's always the same. It's either A, they're sick, B, they've got car troubles. There was literally a guy that worked for me that did not come to work. Like, he just didn't show up. And I'm just like, no text, no call, no nothing. And I'm like, okay, where's this guy at? I'm calling his cell phone, nothing, calling, sending a text message, nothing. Finally, a few hours later, it's like, oh, what's going on, man? And it's like, hey, dude, we're at Disneyland. I'm like, You're at Disneyland. Like, what are you doing at Disneyland, bro? You get your Disney over here, back to work. Like, what are you doing? Like, you just think you can just not say anything to your boss, you can just take off and, but excuses are everywhere about work. Even I was reading some excuses about what people give to cops when they get pulled over on why they don't deserve a ticket. I asked Johnny a few minutes ago, our local PD over here. I said, Johnny, what are some excuses that people gave him? He just said, it's your classic, I didn't know the speed limit, or what is this the best thing you could be doing with your time? Somebody asked him that. It's like, oh, that's my job. Just kidding. Some that I read was this. Oh, I thought the sign I-95 meant that was the speed limit. I'm glad you didn't catch me over the I-210. I wasn't speeding. I was qualifying. That was up in Talladega. I got tagged for doing 54 and a 45, this quote said, and the officer laughed when I told him that it was my dyslexia catching up with me again. And then I read of another one that somebody was doing 100 miles an hour in a school zone. And the officer, real frustrated, walked up and just said, listen, unless you're a pilot, you ain't getting out of this. You're going to jail. And the guy pulled out his license, and he was actually a pilot. And so he got let off the hook. Like some excuses do work. But there's even excuses why people don't go to church. Why people are like, I don't want to go to that church. I heard one said that we got burned out in church, and we've been taking the past 7 years to wait it out. It's like 7-year break. Give me a break. That ain't right. Here's another one said this. Someone called me brother instead of using my name at church. Well, it's a good thing they didn't call you sister. When I am talking to someone that is really contemplating a relationship with God, I did it a few days ago. I was on the phone with a guy in California, and he's a non-believer. And he told me, hey, I don't believe in God. I don't have a relationship with him. And so I'm on the phone with him. And it was actually quite comforting to be on the phone with like a genuine pagan, by the way, because I'm in the South. And so I feel like everybody's a Christian and everybody's familiar. And so I'm from California. And so I'm used to like the land of the fruits and nuts. You know what I mean? Like they're just as weird as you can get. They don't believe in God. And I'm just like, duck in the pond. I'm like, all right, I can deal with this. I can deal with my raw pagans over here. And I can, share with them. But I was on the phone with this guy and I asked him these questions. I said, so do you believe what I'm telling you is true? And I preached the whole gospel to him. I told him about Jesus that came and lived and died and rose again from the dead. And he said, yeah, I do believe what you said is true. I said, okay, so now my next question is this. What is holding you back? What's holding you back from having a real relationship with Jesus Christ? That's always the question that I ask. What's holding you back from having a relationship with Jesus Christ? Or when I come across someone that's backslidden, they've walked away from God, their relationship with God is not where they want it to be, I ask them the question, what's holding you back from having the type of relationship that you should have with the Lord? Oftentimes, people give me the most interesting excuses of what holds them back from God. What holds you back from God? Not only just starting out, but also continuing in your relationship with Him. Why is it that you've allowed just so little of God in your life? And I'm preaching to myself as well. We can all turn the dial up and increase the volume of God in our life. But why is it that we settle for so little? Why is it that we're so content with just a few crumbs when God is saying, I'll give you so much more? What are the excuses that we so often give of why we keep our distance and we straight arm God? We read today in Luke 19 that the last verse, Jesus gives us His motive, His ministry, and really His movements. Well, He says this in verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. What's the motive of Jesus? He's wanting to save you. He's after you. What's the ministry of Jesus? He's seeking out. This is His ministry. He's finding lost people, and He's grabbing a hold of them, and He's saving them. The movements of Jesus is that He's in the places where lost people are. That's where He's at. He's not always in the church, let me tell you. I know His name's on the building, but there are a lot of people that confuse a building, and this is the only place that God resides. He's in a lot more places outside these four walls. And so what we see is that Jesus is out looking for the lost. He's finding them. Now, what He found this day was a guy named Zacchaeus who was very lost, but Jesus went and found him. Zacchaeus, let me give you a little bit about this guy. It's interesting. He's one of life's most invisible people because he's short. He's a short guy. He had probably heard all of the short jokes of his day. They were probably like, Zacchaeus, you should be a rabbi because all of your sermons will be short. Ha, 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 ha. Like they had their own jokes about the guy. Thank you for the courtesy laugh. Appreciate that. Miniature golf was just golf to... These are the jokes, okay? Just wait. They're coming. Get ready. He would have been really good at baseball, probably as a what? Yeah, as a shortstop. That's right. As a shortstop. His favorite dessert? Probably like strawberry. Oh, yeah, that's pretty good. It's like you've read my message already. He probably told his own short jokes just so that he could, make it through, pretend like it didn't hurt him. But along the line, this short guy became like the mob boss of a town called Jericho. He not only became one of the most wealthy in the city, but he became like one of the dominating forces. He was the chief tax collector, meaning that he was like, like the Godfather himself. Like, hey, let me give you a little deal. Like you've got little tiny short Zacchaeus walking around and people are, closing the blinds and hiding, because Zacchaeus is in town. You know what I mean? When someone comes up to your front door and you don't have a Ring camera and they knock and you're like peeking, you don't want them to know you're there, and so you're like crawling across the ground. That's what people are doing when Zacchaeus is in town because he's got his hand in their wallet. He's the chief tax collector. He wants what belongs to him. And it's not just he works for the government, but he's got his own practice. So he's got his own LLC where he's gone to law school and now he's out there just ripping people off, and he's become really wealthy by lining his pockets with your money. That's Zacchaeus. Not a good reputation, not a guy you're friends with, and he's really short, and so he's got short man syndrome. Along the way, he found a way to be compensated for his shortness. He vowed to be smarter and richer, maybe even a little meaner than anybody else. Here's Zacchaeus, the, again, original mobster of Jericho. But something happened this day because Zacchaeus, who was notorious, came into contact with somebody that radically changed his life in a moment. Jesus enters this city. I've got 4 points for you this morning. And this is really the ministry of Jesus. When you come into contact with Jesus, something will happen in your life. I don't care where you're at, how far in the dark you are, or on the peripheral, or doesn't matter where you're at. When you have a relationship with Jesus, you will have the same results that Zacchaeus did this day. But here's the first thing I see from our story right in the beginning. It's this, number one: Jesus knows your name, and he knows where to find you. Jesus knows your name, and he knows where to find you. Look at the very beginning, verse 1. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. The story before this, Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and he comes across a blind guy sitting outside the walls of Jericho. I've been to Jericho multiple times, by the way, and it is not a desirable place. It's not like a good pit stop on your way to Jerusalem. It is torn down. It is just a really bad place to be. It's a super sketchy spot even today, and it was back then. And so Jesus did not really need to go through Jericho. He could have just continued on his way up to Jerusalem. But instead, he takes a little detour, and he goes inside Jericho. And this tells me that Jesus never wastes an opportunity. Like, I need you to hear me this morning. He never wastes an opportunity even in your life. Every move Jesus has ever made has been very strategic, even in your life. Here he planned a visit with a man up in a tree. Can you think for a moment, like in the Bible, all of the obscure places that Jesus went and met people? Think about all the places that Jesus just took a little turn or found himself to go meet those people that were the lost one. 99 were safe, but one was out and away. Can you think of those places? One, I think about the Samaritan woman by the well. In the middle of the day, Jesus goes and finds a Samaritan woman out by a well. It says that he had to take a little journey through Sychar there in John chapter 4. He took a detour because there was a woman he wanted to encounter. Or about the man living in the tombs. Don't you remember the guy that was cutting himself? The guy that was crying out, said, I am Legion, in Mark chapter 2. Jesus did not have to go through the tombs. It was actually not customary for Jews to do that, but Jesus had an appointment with a man in the tombs. What about the thief up on a cross. You think it's by accident that it was that day, at that place, that Jesus got crucified? No, he had an appointment, not only for the sin of the world, but also for a thief next to him. What about the woman caught in adultery? And she got brought before Jesus. Jesus met her right there. What about Pilate's wife? Do you remember that random story in the book of Matthew where it says that Pilate's wife before the crucifixion had a dream of Jesus? Isn't it interesting that Jesus showed up to her in a dream? Oh, the places that Jesus has showed up in your life that have gone unnoticed. But let me tell you, they're not accidental. Here we see that Jesus was willing to go to find a guy that was up in a tree, of any place to go get him. The places that Jesus is willing to go to get a hold of us. It's interesting to me. And we can conclude that most of the people we read about in the Bible are not in the temple. Church ministry is often not the way that Jesus finds his sheep. I, in my own life, was in a gym when Jesus came and hunted me out. Where were you at when Jesus came and found you? Was it the typical place, or was it in a spot that then you don't want to admit? Did Jesus find you in church? Where was it that he made his power known to you? Where were you at in life? What stage of life? What age were you? Where were you at? Were you in the midst of sin? Were you in the midst of a bad decision? Were you in the midst of trouble, crying out to God? Where were you when Jesus made an unexpected detour to come and find you? Some of us were alone, or maybe in a hospital bed, maybe in obscurity or a dream or a vision. It's not coincidence. A few years ago, I had a guy, I was working in California, and they called me and they said, "Hey, Pastor Jason, there's a guy in the front that is just crying uncontrollably down in the front office. Can you go talk to him?" And it was my first day, or it was my day up was what it meant. We had 39 pastors on staff. Every pastor had a day up. What it meant, anybody that ever walked into the front doors, you had to counsel them, or anybody that called. And so it was 8 hours a day, nonstop counseling. I was first up on Mondays, second up on Fridays. And so all day long, counseling. That's what we did for 15 years. And so a guy comes walking in the door. He's crying uncontrollably. He's like, "I need to get right with God." I'm like, okay, he's probably drunk, or probably high. And, just being my typical cynical self. And so I'm like, "We're in California. What do you expect?" And so we go sit down, and he's like, "Listen," he's like, "I've not been a Christian my whole life." His name is David Hensley, by the way. It's a true story. And so David, if you're watching, this is your story. David, he goes, "Man, I'm crying. I was driving, and on my way home from work, and God showed up to me." I'm like, "What? What do you mean?" He's like, "I don't know." He's like, "In the sky." He's like, I'm like, "Okay, were you drinking?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Were you smoking something? Like Moses at the burning bush, like, were you smoking a little bit?" No. I'm like, "Okay, so you're sober. So what was it?" He's like, "I don't know. It looked like a cross or something in the sky. And I felt like I need to get right with God." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, so here, and he just starts confessing everything to me, telling me all this stuff that he's going on in his life. And he's just like, "I need to get right with God." I'm like, "Okay, well, let me tell you about Jesus. He came and he lived." He's like, "Okay, I believe that. And he prayed. He asked Jesus Christ to come into his life. From that moment on, in my conversation with David Hensley, all of a sudden his life completely turned around. All of a sudden he started coming to church on a regular basis. He started living for God and reading his Bible. And literally a complete different human after that encounter with God in some interesting way. Then his dad came to Christ. Then his little brother Mark came to Christ. Then his family started coming to the church. And now all of his entire family got saved. Why? Because of this interesting encounter that he had with God. The ways that God shows up in your life are the things that you've heard. Don't be shocked when they're out of the ordinary. When it's not just a guy up here preaching from the word and people come to faith as they normally do. Zacchaeus was in a tree. He was in a tree. Okay, you have to put yourself, when's the last time you were in a tree? When's the last time? Be honest. It's been a long time, right? Unless you're up there trimming your trees, you're not out there in trees. But Zacchaeus, he was in a tree this day. And Jesus had an appointment with him at this day, at this time, in this way. And so verse 5 tells us that when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he saw him and he said to him, "Zacchaeus, why don't you come on down? Because I'm going to stay at your house today." I wonder what Zacchaeus was thinking. He's up in the tree, and he's, trying to get a good eye shot at Jesus, and he gets walked up to, and Jesus knows his name. He knows his name. Not only does he know where to find him, but now he knows his name. Hey, Zacchaeus. He's like looking around like, I met you before? You stalking me? I'm the one that stalks people. I'm the chief tax collector. How do you know my name? Zacchaeus, hey, why don't you come on down, because I'm going to your house tonight. This was not the only time that Jesus knew somebody under a tree. It was also Philip and Nathanael. If you remember in the book of John, it was Nathanael that was underneath a fig tree. And Nathanael starts walking up, and Jesus compliments Nathanael, and he's like, hey, how do you know me? He's like, Nathanael, before Philip called you, I saw you underneath the fig tree. And he's like, oh man, he did see me. The Bible makes it very clear that God knows where you're at, and he knows your name. He knows where you're at in life. He knows where to find you. He knows how to hunt you down. He knows the right way, the right time, the right place. He knows how to get your number. And he knows something even personal about you. He knows your name. Doesn't it make a difference when somebody knows your name? And that God knows your name? He knows not just your name, but he knows everything about you. He knew Nathanael's name. It was in John chapter 10 where it says, the good shepherd, the gatekeeper, it says the sheep recognize his voice and they come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. John goes on saying that I am the good shepherd. Jesus saying, I know my sheep and I'm known by my own. Can I remind you this morning that the Lord knows you. He knows your situation. He knows where you're at. And he's calling you to have a deeper relationship with himself. He's calling you by name, saying, hey, why don't you come on down? Why don't you come a little bit closer? He's hunting you out at your job, at your place, in your weakness, in your depression, in the middle of your sin. He's coming to you. And he's calling you by name. Why don't you come on down? Because I'm coming to your house today. Secondly, I see is this. When Jesus draws near, don't let anything hold you back from him. When Jesus draws near, don't let anything hold you back from him. If you look at the story, it's interesting. I think Zacchaeus had a lot of excuses he could have given as to why he did not want to go after Jesus. A lot of excuses he could have given. I mean, there are a ton in our story, but he didn't give any of those excuses. Rather, he didn't let anything hold him back. We have to recognize Jesus came to his city first. So he hears about Jesus, then he sees Jesus, and then he wants to go find and get a better look at Jesus. It says in the Greek there, to sought Jesus, that he really not just physically wanted to get near Jesus, but there was something a little bit more, where he wanted to draw near to Jesus. And the best way he knew how to do it was to go and run ahead and climb a little tree and get a good look at him. It says in Isaiah chapter 55, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. Verse 3, it says, and he sought to see who Jesus was. He sought to see who Jesus was. Jesus came close, and he wanted him closer. Something drew his attention to Jesus. I'm sure when you've got a job like this, you get people's reputation. You hear about what's going on. You know, if you're a tax collector, if you work for the IRS, you know what I mean? Like you're going to know the dirt on people. And so he had heard about Jesus, no doubt. He's seen crowds that are wanting to get close to Jesus. And so with what he knows and what he's heard, something in him is desiring something more. He's wanting to get close to the Lord. Have you not felt that desire in your heart? Every single one of us have a desire for eternity, where eternity is calling out in your heart for more of God. Every single one of you. And here, he's like, man, I want to get close. And so when he acted on his desires, it was then that Jesus started moving that direction. He had an idea of where Jesus was going to go. And he's like, if I go in that tree, maybe he'll pass by this way, and maybe I can get a good look at him. What he didn't know was that every time you move toward God, he moves towards you. The Bible tells us that God speaking, if you draw near to me, I will draw near to you. That's what James says. You draw near to God, he draws near to you. When you turn the magnet of your heart toward God, he comes close. And so here, Zacchaeus is like, I want to get close. I want to see. When's the last time that you tried to get close to God? That you tried to to get away from the distractions, get away from the excuses, and get a good look at God, a good encounter with God. When you said, I'm done with just a little bit, I don't want any more crumbs, I want all of God. When's the last time that you really went for it? God will draw close when you draw close to him. Sadly, not everybody responds this way because excuses are made. There are a lot of reasons that suppress you from doing that, aren't there? Like the kids are crying, I work long hours, I got school work, I've got too much going on. God, I can't do it. God knows, he understands. I'm just going to give him a little bit of my time. And it's like, excuses are everywhere. And you can come up with every reason possible of why you don't want more of God, but who's losing out? You are, that's right. You are. There are distractions and even noises that drown out his still small voice where he's calling your name. And he's saying, come with me to the secret place. Meet me in the quiet. It was David the psalmist that said, in the morning, God, do I lift my prayer. Unto thee do I lift my voice. In the morning, in the quiet, in the secluded place. Jesus often would withdraw his disciples to a secluded place. It's there. It's in the solitude where real relationship with God takes place. But let me back up a little bit more. Here's some of the reasons that Zacchaeus could have given why he, didn't want to go after Jesus. One, because he's the tax collector, his own practice, his own office, his own reputation. He's rich, so it's not like he needs something from Jesus. People would make it, Jesus is a crutch. That's why you're going to get him. Man, homeboy, he's my whole hospital. Okay, he's not just a crutch to me. He's everything to me. He's my life support. That's what he is, and I need Jesus. But, Zacchaeus could have been like, look, I don't need him. I've got everything. But no, he didn't hide behind that excuse, even being an IRS agent himself. I heard a funny joke about a bar that was hurting for finances, and they wanted to come up with an extra way to earn a little bit of money, and they were convinced that their bartender was actually the strongest guy around. And so what they did was they put $1,000 down, and this bartender would pick up a lemon, and he would squeeze it into a glass. And the bet was this: if you can get another drop from this lemon after the bartender squeezes it, then you get the $1,000. And so people would come from all around to come and get it. They got to pay $10 to enter the contest. Nobody could do it. You got people from all different types, and they're squeezing that thing, and they couldn't get another drop. He was holding his record until one day this skinny little guy came walking in with a little polyester suit, and he came walking in. He's like, I want to try this. And the guy joked. He pulled out a glass, squeezed the lemon, and he handed it to him all confident and cocky. And then the little guy, he picked it up, and really without even trying, he just squeezed it, and 6 little more drops. Blink, 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 blink. And he took the money, and he's like, I'm out of here. And the guy's like, hold on. Like, what do you do? Are you like a lumberjack? No, you like a linesman? Do you like arm wrestle champion? What are you? He's like, no, man, I work for the IRS. And squeeze every drop out of you know what I mean? I genuinely laughed at that when I was looking up. Like, dude, that's so true. He had a lot of excuses, honestly. He's like, man, I can't go because the crowd. If you look at verse 3, it says that he couldn't because of the crowd. He was of short stature. Oftentimes the crowds hold us back from Jesus, don't they? There are people in your life that hold you back from Jesus. And he could have allowed that to happen. He could have I'm not waiting in that line. Look at the crowd. Look at all the attention. Look at the beehive of mess. And he could have just backed away. He's like, but no, that did not hold him back. Plenty of excuses could have held him back from him. His physical restrictions, being too short. He couldn't get on somebody's shoulders like my son at, back at Disneyland, to see the parade overneath everybody. He couldn't do that. But instead of making an excuse, he made an effort. And that's really the point this morning. Instead of making an excuse, make an effort toward God and see what happens. Instead of allowing the crowd and his physical stature and his reputation and his job and all of those things to hold him back from God, what did he do? He did what he could do. It says here, look what he says. Verse 4, so he ran ahead and he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass by that way. He ran ahead of the crowd. He saw the crowd, and he thought to himself, I got to get ahead of the crowd, and I'm going to get up a little higher, and that's what I'm going to do. This was his plan. You must decide where you're going to be in life. The crowd is never the place where you want to be. You don't want to be in the crowd. The decision to run ahead of the crowd is the best decision, always. Here are the realities of being ahead of the crowd in your life. And when I say the crowd, I mean the people in your life, your friends, society around you. I don't care what the crowd is, but when you get away from the crowd and you get alone with God, here are the repercussions of that. Number one is that it is hard. He had to work a lot to get ahead of that crowd. Two, it takes vision to get ahead of the crowd. If you just want to continue like a dead fish floating down the stream, continue with what you're doing with the world's agenda, continue that direction, and you'll do just fine, and you'll end up in hell. Or you take vision, it's like, okay, I'm going to get ahead of the crowd. It takes a little bit of hard work, a little bit of vision, and you end up alone. A lot of the times you're alone when you're not around the crowd. And that's exactly what Jesus wants. Which is interesting, by the way, because the crowd ended up churning on him. You know, we often find the most comfort in the crowd where people are complimenting you and you've got your affirmations around you and it's easy to hide in the crowd. But the crowd actually churned on Zacchaeus. They didn't like him before Jesus and they didn't like him afterward either. If you look at it down here, it says, the crowds, it says, when they saw it, verse 7, they all complained. Oh, he has gone to be the guest with a man who is a sinner. And it's like, no, they didn't like the guy. They didn't like the old Zacchaeus and they definitely didn't like the new Zacchaeus. They were complaining about it. You can't find comfort in the crowd or from the crowd. The crowd will always hold you back or push you from God. We're not meant to get our cues from the world or the crowd. We're meant to get it from the Lord. Point 3 I see here is this: a relationship with Jesus is only formed in the secret place. A real relationship with Jesus is only formed in the secret place. Look at verse 5. So he's running ahead, he's up in a tree, and he's waiting, and Jesus walks down the path and stands in front of the tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, I want to go to your house tonight. Zacchaeus was not planning on dinner, friends, okay? He was not planning a dinner party. Zacchaeus was not anticipating having somebody come over, especially Jesus, this Jewish rabbi. But Jesus walks up and says, hey, Zacchaeus, let's get away from the crowd and let's go to your house. I want to come to your place tonight. A relationship with Jesus is only formed in the secret place. What was Zacchaeus' response? He got down out of that tree quick, he got up in that tree nice and slow as an older man, I'm sure, taking his sweet time out on a limb like a squirrel, right? But now all of a sudden, he just like gymnast came on down. He made haste and came down the tree. Like he jumped, he held on his little dress or skirt, whatever they wear back then. They're little like long robes. And he's like, woo, and he jumps down the tree. And he's excited. He's like, come on, let's go to my house. He's like, well, this is going to be great. And so there's excitement in Zacchaeus. There's something coming alive in Zacchaeus. Jesus wants to hang out with him. You want to come to my house? And Jesus did. Jesus wants go to your house as well. Did you know that? Jesus wants to dine with you as well. Book of Revelation chapter 3, it says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anybody would open the door, I will come in and I will dine with him, is what it says in the book of Revelation. This idea that Jesus is saying, hey, I want to dine with you. I want to be alone with you. I want to eat with you. I want to sit with you in the quiet, away from everybody else, away from the crowds, away from the hustle and the bustle, away from the distractions and the noise. I want to get alone with you. Zacchaeus, we're going to your house. And he calls you by name and he says, I want to go to your house. I want to be alone with you. The excuses we give as to why we don't spend time with God. But Zacchaeus, no, you can come to my house. I haven't picked up in like a month, but you can come. You're a guy, so you understand. And Jesus comes on over to his house. They eat together. It's an amazing time. And we know it's an amazing time because something happens in Zacchaeus. And I guess that's my challenge to you. Is like, how much quiet time, alone time, secluded time in the secret place do you give with God? Friends, please, Prioritize this in your life. Get alone with the Lord. Allow him to invade the secret places of your life. The home was like the most like secluded, and you know what I mean? If I was to go to your house right now without you picking up or not straightening up, you'd feel a little awkward, you know? You'd be like shutting doors and, oh no, you don't want to go in there and see that closet, you know, Pastor Jay. Or if Jesus were to walk into your house, how many things would we cover up and hide and delete and move? And you know, like we would try to keep him in one room, but Jesus wants to go into your house. He wants to invade all the different rooms of your life. He wants to come in and clean up and take time to walk through, but meet you there in those places. Because he knows where you're at. He knows where you live. He knows your name. He knows the situation you're in. He knew what he was dealing with. They said there in verse 7 that he's a sinner. Yeah. In verse 10, it says that he seeks and saves those who are lost. Like, don't be shocked when Jesus wants to invade your sin. I know a lot of times you want to clean up your life before you come to God, or you're in the midst of a secret sin right now, and you're like, man, I need to get this cleaned up, and then I'm going to come to God. You're in a life-dominating situation. Actually, no, Jesus will come and dine with you. Jesus went and dined with the sinners and the prostitutes and the harlots and those that were of like ill repute. He went and did it. The difference is this, is he didn't participate in their sin. He went and called them out of it, but he was there with them in it. And Jesus will come find you in your situation, and he will pull you out of it. He will, if you let him in. It's in the alone time that Jesus does his work. Fourthly, lastly, as we close, no one can have a personal relationship with Jesus and stay the same. I thought I would get more of a response than that, but it's all right. Thank you. No one can have a personal relationship with Jesus and still stay the same. When you encounter God, things will change in your life. You know, this past week when I was at the high school, I made this statement. I said, you know, when you know Jesus, your life will change. I said, matter of fact, if we go outside and we were to stand in the street and get hit by a truck, you know, after you come into contact with that truck, you're going to be changed a little bit, right? Yeah, you're gonna have a little bit of a change. Like there's going to be a physical change when you get hit by a vehicle. It's interesting to me that you can come into contact with the God of the universe and still not be changed. It's interesting that you can say that you know God, have a relationship with him, you gave your life to Christ, you got baptized when you were a baby, whatever, and you're like, but you're still the same old person. You don't know God. You have not come into contact with the creator and the sustainer of the universe. There is no way that you would remain the same. Zacchaeus didn't. Here's the most notorious guy. This is like the mobster himself who's been collecting all the money, and he's got his own reputation, and people don't like him. And here he is, encounters Jesus, and in a moment, look what happens to him. In a moment, verse 8, then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor. The greedy guy is now giving away his money. If I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore it fourfold. The immediate change that we see in Zacchaeus was that he's like, man, I encountered this guy, and everything in my life makes sense now. All of my greed has turned into giving. All of my wants and selfishness has now completely flip-flopped. And this is what happens when we encounter God. And so maybe you're sitting there, well, maybe, Jason, man, this is not really taking place in my life. Then you really need to go home and ask that you would encounter God. God, would you invade my heart? God, would you come in every room? Lord, would you change me, change my addictions, change my thoughts, change my desires? God, I want to come into contact with you. Would you change me, Lord? Would you make me like Zacchaeus, where all of a sudden I'm no longer the same person that I used to be? When you have a personal relationship with Jesus, you can't stay the same. And that's beautiful. That's amazing. I'm thankful for that. Because you can go through a lot of AA classes. You can go through a lot of courses. You can go through a lot of rehabs. You can go to a lot of counselings and appointments and still leave the same. You can. You can fake it till you make it. You can try to convince yourself that you're changed. But when you really know Jesus, like, I know I'm no longer the same person I used to be. I know my desires have changed. When you know Jesus, he changes you from the inside out. And I'm so thankful for that. I used to love the dark, but now I love the light. I used to love my sin, but now I want to please God. I used to look out for myself, but now it's like, Lord, how can I honor you? When you know God, it changes your desires. Do you agree with me? Do you believers in here, you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Yes, I agree. The final thing I see was that Zacchaeus came down a tree to find salvation because a few days later, Jesus was going to go up a tree to purchase salvation for him. Zacchaeus came down a tree and found salvation, and it was only just a little bit later that Jesus Christ himself went up on a tree, the tree of Calvary, and he died for his sins. He purchased that salvation. He made that possible. And that's really where it all starts, is recognizing what Jesus came and did, and how he died and he rose again from the dead. This is really what the whole Bible is all about. Verse 10, for he came to seek and to save that which is lost. The way he finds you is he goes and he gets you. He comes into your city, comes into your town, comes into your place, comes to your tree, calls your name, invites to your house, cleans you up. And all of that is possible because he went to a tree himself and he died. And he bled for us. And he showed us his great love by dying for us. And then proving that he was God, he rose again from the dead with all authority in his hand, giving us the promise of eternal life one day, that he's with us now and we'll be with him for the rest of eternity. Friends, it's amazing. It really is. The power of Jesus, what he's able to do. This is good news. And so I shared it this week with that school, and I thought, I want to share it with you just to remind you. What is Jesus doing in Montgomery? He's seeking and saving the lost. He's going after people who are content with a little bit, and he's pulling them in for a little bit more. Thank you, Janice. He's hunting people down. He is in Montgomery. He's seeking the lost. He's saving them. This morning, I want to close in a word of prayer. Maybe that's you. Maybe this morning you need to get right with the Lord. So let me pray for you as we close. Lord, I thank you for today. God, I just want to ask that even, Lord, as we close in prayer, Lord, I see what you did in Zacchaeus' life. God, that you went after this individual who was far from you. But Lord, you drew near and you called his name and you knew his reputation. But Lord, even in that, you still wanted that personal relationship with him. And once you encountered him, you changed him. Lord, I pray this morning, there are some that maybe don't know you. God, I pray that you would approach them today. Call their name. Remind them that you love them. Even in the midst of their situation. God, I pray you change them. And maybe there are people here, Lord, that have allowed a lot of excuses to come into the way of why they've not gone after you. They're content to just look at you, but not to dine with you. God, I pray that you'd pull them close. With our head bowed and our eyes closed and believers are praying this morning, if you would like to get right with the Lord, you would like to have salvation come to your house, you would like to have Jesus dine with you to come into your heart, to forgive you of your sin, to wash away the guilt, to give you the hope of heaven when you die. If you want a relationship with Jesus Christ this morning, I just simply want you to lift your hand in the air so I can pray for you. If you would like that relationship with him, you want to ask Christ to come in, there are hands going up around the room, you're not alone. You want to start a relationship with Jesus Christ. Would you lift your hand in the air so I could pray for you? God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. You can put your hands down. Maybe there's another group where you've walked away. You've gotten distracted. But today you want to come back. You want to hit the reset button on your relationship with God. You want to push the excuses aside and you want to know him again. To draw near and have him draw near to you again. If you'd like to recommit your life to Christ, I want you to lift your hand in the air so I can pray for you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. For all of you that raised your hand, I now want to lead you in a prayer. The Bible makes it clear that if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart the Lord Jesus and that God raised him from the dead, it says that you will be saved. And so I'm going to ask that you would pray this prayer with me, that you would mean it in your heart, though. Well, we're going to get right with God together. So if you raise your hand, would you pray this with me now? You pray it with me. It's, Dear Jesus, I come to you this morning and I lay down my life before you. Jesus, I trust you and I need you. Jesus, thank you for coming and dying on a cross and rising from the dead. Jesus, I believe in you. I believe that you are God. Would you be my Savior? Would you wash away my sins? I invite you into my life, into my home. Would you change me? I commit my life to you and help me follow you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen and amen. Amen.